Right, so we're live. Today is another stream looking at IMVU's Toolkit. So today what we're going to do is take a look at couples pose. So first thing we need to do is just sort out Blender's appearance so that get everything on the screen. So in case it wasn't clear from yesterday or the other stream from the other day, one of the things you can do with Blender is change the interface around a little bit to accommodate whatever screen you might be working to. So click drag, we want this plus, this little plus. I'm going to duplicate the current scene. So that's the default layout, which is called layout, which is the 3D view, the outliner, and the properties panel. But because we're limited on space and we don't want to have all of these confusing buttons down the side, and all these icons, what we can do is just create a new layout. So duplicate current, that'll create a duplicate which will be, there it is, layout. So double click, rename this TikTok 3D, whoops, 3D, enter, and then what we can do here is get rid of, no, actually let's make another, duplicate that again, and we'll call this, double click, TikTok outliner. So what we're going to do next is just get rid of, so this is the outliner view, so we're going to mouse over the border between each of the views, get the double-headed arrow, right click, join areas, join those two together, right click, join areas, join those two together. So what that means is that we've now got our outliner and properties panels to a dedicated layout that we can toggle between. And then let's just get rid of this one. Oops. So same again, but we want to be on this side. So we are mousing over that way. Join those two. Join areas. Those two. So yoink that up to the top, out to the border. So now we can access materials if we need to add a material to something, and we're not scrunching up our viewport. So TikTok 3D layout. So toolkit, view, sidebar, there's a sidebar, toolkit. We want animation tool, append animation file, and that will load in the avatar. So get rid of the sidebar so we can see what we're doing. But that adds the action editor, which we want to keep, so we can just get rid of this one at the bottom. So in the same way that you can change the layout by mousing over a border, as we did with the properties panel and outliner, we can do the same thing. So that's vertically. So we can do the same thing horizontally. Mouse over a border, right click, join areas, down to the bottom. And if we save this, so if we file, save as, this layout would be saved with this file. Let's just call this 1. Save as. Hang on a second. So that will be saved with that file. So anytime that file is opened, it'll open up with these, well, with the 2 new layouts that we created. So this is the default avatar. We're going to create a couples pose. Now, because the toolkit doesn't have the ability to create a couples pose by default because of the way that the avatars are set up, we have to work around the problem. And essentially, we create our first pose. So we pose the avatar once. And then what we have to do is duplicate the meshes and create a proxy, a stand-in model that we then convert into a mesh. Well, it's already a mesh, but that we convert into a mesh that we can use as a standalone object that we then load back into the file and position relative to what we want with the second pose that should then match the first pose. So it's a little tricky, but it's the only way that we can do this with the toolkit, because again, the toolkit doesn't include the ability to create 2 poses at the same time. So set the file up. We need to enable, so we're going to just make a static pose. So make pose, export all bones, enable auto key. That will insert the keyframes that we need as we pose the bones. And that is all for the moment. Let's just save this. Save as. And if you've got Blender 4.0 or above, you'll have the save incremental option, so we can click that and it'll save an incremental version of the file. So let's just do a quick pose. So select the rig. We need to be in pose mode. Which will change the rig so that we can select each of these shapes individually, and these are what we use to pose the avatar. So let's do a, so we can use we can use the shortcut keys or the widgets. So the shortcut for that is G, the shortcut for that is R, and the shortcut for that is S, but we don't use excuse me, we don't use scale on bones. Alternatively, all we need to do is just press the shortcut keys. So G to move, R to rotate. So let's just remove, oh, and as we do that, we get a keyframe marker in the timeline because we've moved the bone. So it does it automatically when this is enabled. So let's just close that N key so that we can see what we're doing. And on some poses or some bones, it's best to use the widgets and or, so if we want to rotate this in a particular axis or orientation, we can use the widget and click on one of the colored loops, or we can press the R key to initiate global rotate and then press one of the main orientation indicators. So that's Z, Y, or X. So that's the XYZ axes. Let's just go with Z. Pop that out there. Like so. Let's do a weighty pose. Character is pulling away. So this is kind of similar to the pose we created in the previous stream. So we're just clicking on each of the individual control elements. So these are the knees. These control the orientation of the knees and the twist of the leg as a whole. We've got the elbows, similar shapes. Might not be able to see it too well on that one, but might be able to on this one. So dramatic. So let's do oops, wrong bones. So undo. So we can use undo to undo specific actions or motions or operations, or we can select the element that we want to correct and press 0 bone, and this will reset that bone and that one, and that just resets it so that we get, now which one is it? I can't remember which one it is. Yeah, it is that one. So remembering what we said in the previous video about creating tension, that takes us past the it's the wrong menu, go away, viewpoint, right, that might push us or push the avatar past the center line, which ordinarily would overbalance the character, but we've got, select the hands, we're creating tension because we can counterbalance that with the second pose that we're going to create. Whoops. Got to be quite precise where you click on the widget, because if you click anywhere other than the colored loops, you'll activate the universal manipulation, which allows the bone to move in all directions. So we've got to be careful. Right, so let's say that that's our first pose. Yeah, no, let's undo that. So undo. Don't want to reset the bone because that will reset it back to its defaults, which will potentially push it back to its original position. So undo, undo. Oops. Right, so that'll be our first pose. Like so. Right, we need to save this file, save increment. Now for creating the second pose, as mentioned at the beginning, we need to switch into object mode so that we can select the mesh or the meshes. We want to select all the parts that are going to be useful for creating a pose. So you don't necessarily need to select all of them, but in this case we may very well need to. And then just the head. Duplicate this object, duplicate, object duplicate, so that will create a duplicate. Press escape to reset, and this is where it gets tricky. So what we want to do now is object join, object join. That joins them all together into one mesh, and then we can use our newfangled layouts. We want to be in the outliner. So there's the outliner, and we can see our, our custom mesh. We'll call this, double click, pose 1. We need to be in modifier properties, and we've got this in place. Ordinarily we would go into the more options and click apply, but if we do that in this case, because our object is actually a mesh that has morph controls, which is what this section is. This controls the head, and as we've joined all the meshes together, all these controls are essentially associated with the entire mesh. So what we have to do is make sure that we have outliner pose 1. Let's just double check. Yeah, we need to be in object data properties, and we need to get rid of all these morph controls. Now there isn't a quick way to do this. We have to select each one in turn and just delete all of them. So clicking the minus arrow, the minus button. So we have to click all of these, yoink, 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 yoink. And there are about a couple of hundred of them, I think. There we go. So now, we don't necessarily need to get rid of the vertex groups. Those are incidental. So back to modifiers, and now we can apply. Let's just, for this particular, let's go into the layout so that we can actually see what we're looking at. Materials. So, and you can see now why we created that new layout, because everything's all smushed up. So there's our mesh, so it's pose 1. So we need to be in modifiers, and we're going to more options. That's the arrow, the down pointing arrow, and click on apply. So we should now be able to apply that, and it will apply the modifier, which means that we can now move this avatar without it being affected by the mesh or by the rig. But the thing that's actually important in this case when we're creating couples poses is the origin point. So we have to make sure that when we join all our objects together to create our pose proxy, which is the mesh, we need to keep an eye on what this origin point does, because we're going to use this as a coincidental origin point, hence the name, for the second pose that will be matched up to this. So let's go back into our special views, get rid of the sidebar because we don't need that right now. Oh, one thing we can do actually, select the rig, that's the word I was looking for, toolkit, make sure that we have a save increment. So this is number 4, and we can export this initial pose. So we should have, and we still do, we can move the rig and it won't affect our proxy. That's what we want. So we're going to export this. So again, make pose, so that's a static pose. Export all bones, so it will export everything. Morph controls, we don't need that, so disable or uncheck. And it'll do that, which is kind of annoying. That's okay, everything else is okay. So save over the top and then export. We'll get a confirmation message and the interface will change, but there is one thing we want to do. Because we're creating a couples pose, that means we're going to create 2 FBX or animation sequences, and for clarity what we want to do is select the armature, and in the action editor we want to make sure that the sequence that does not have the hyphen, that's the one that's generated by the toolkit. So the plain name, select that and rename it. So this will be I need to remember if we've done another one. Now pose 1, pose underscore 1. Let's resave and re-export. So when the toolkit does its thing, it preps the timeline relative to what IMVU is going to expect when the pose is imported into Studio. So it has to do this stuff to the timeline. That acts as confirmation that the file has been exported. So we can check this. If we open Studio, so this is going to be a bit awkward because we can't scrunch up Studio too well to fit this format. So create, we're just going to derive from PID. I have to make that a bit bigger. So just going to use the empty mood because it's a quick way of testing. So that's 10,945,930. So the empty mood is a quick way of testing to make sure our poses have worked. Search, there's the empty mood. So there's our preview. Click on derive. so there's the 3D view with our avatar, and all we're going to do is, so we're going to have to keep going backwards and forwards with this. Import our FBX. Import FBX. Now we have to find it. It should be appended pose, if I remember correctly. Pose. Right, pose, not that one, pose. There it is, pose 1. So select, open. We'll go through this import process. So it's got our animation. This is what it's seeing in the file. So set up FBX. All of this stuff is okay. We don't need to do anything here. Disable meshes. Well, there isn't any meshes, so we can just uncheck that box. Next. No materials. Next. There's our animation sequence. So review. Whoops. There's the animation. Whoops again. Import. Right, so it's brought it in, which is confirmed by the asset panel. So now we need to be in component so that we can create a new action. Create action, so plus button. We want to call this stance.standing. Stance.standing, uppercase S. We can leave the action type as is or select avatar. So we're clicking on the little down arrow thing. Ensemble, so click a new, click to create a new one, and we want skeletal animation section, asset, and in the drop down we should see our pose. There it is, pose 1. That's our FBX has been converted into an XAF file, which is the file format for animated sequences that IMVU uses. So we now need to set our loops. So frame 1, this is a static pose. Frame 2, so we're only playing one frame. I want it to loop forever, so that's 0. Everything else is okay. We don't necessarily need to do anything here. If we want, we can disable gaze. This stops the avatar's head from moving around. So click on that, activate, apply, and then if we preview, or when we preview, we should see our pose. Let's see if I can get this a little, because we can't move the panels. You can just about see the avatar, so preview, and there is our pose. So using the empty mood is just a quick way of double checking that our pose functions the way that we expect it to. So that's our pose. Let's save this. So file, save as, whoops. Let's call this TikTok pose 1. Save. So we'll keep this in the editor. So that's pose 1, that works. So pose 2. We've exported this from Blender, that's our pose. So for pose 2, we need to create a new project, general. Now we've lost our special layouts, so let's just quickly do those again. If you want to keep these as a default, if you want to do something where you're changing the layout and you want to keep the editors that you create, so this is TikTok 3D. Let's just quickly, no, actually, let's do this properly. Plus duplicate current, double click, TikTok outliner. So if you want to keep these once they are set up, let's join. So this is the outliner. So join areas that way, join areas that way. So that's our outliner 3D. Right click, join areas that way, join areas that way. So if you want to keep these, so if you make a custom layout, what you can do is in the file menu, go down to defaults, and then you can save the layout or the modifications that you've made to the layout. You can save those as the defaults. So next time that you start Blender, it will include, or it will bring in, the new layouts. So that's a tip for creating different layouts and presentations of Blender that you might find useful for depending on what you're doing or what project you're working on. So pose number 2, view, sidebar, toolkit, animation tool again, append animation file, and again it's brought in the action editor, so we need to merge that with that one, join areas like so. So that's right click again. So we need to set up the scene or the project auto key, so that's auto insert. We want make pose, export all bones, and disable morph controls. We don't need those. So make pose, export all bones. So let's just save this before we do anything. Save as. We'll call this TikTok pose 2. So for a couples pose, now this is where it gets interesting, confusing and tricky. So with pose 1, we created the pose, duplicated the meshes and converted those to a detached mesh object. We renamed it in the outliner to make it easy to find when we do this next bit, which is file, append. So this is like import, but not quite the same. So append. So we're going to browse to the blend file. No, we've got to remember where we put this. Avatar, is it? Yep, that's the right file. So we want TikTok. Lots of files, lots of files, lots of files, lots of files. There it is. TikTok pose 1, so it's that one. So double click, and when we append, blend files act like zip files or zip archives, and we can browse into them as a self-contained directory or folder. What we want is object folder, double click, and then here we want the mesh that we called pose 1, or the object as it is, called pose1. Where is it? Should be in here somewhere. Where is it? Oh, we've opened the wrong file, that's why. Dang it. Pulling pose 1, that's not what we want. Where is it? What did we call it? Oh, I'm going to have to cancel this. Right, have we saved this? Pose 2, save. Right, just loading in the... Right, couples pose 4. Right, so append. Yeah, so this is the problem with creating lots of files, is trying to remember which one was which. So append. Find the file. TikTok. Couples pose 4. So double click. Object folder. Now we should have it in here somewhere. There it is, pose 1. So select. We don't need to play around with these. These are okay. So we just want to append. Oops, that's off screen. Hang on. We don't need to play around with these. The defaults, those are okay. So we just need to append. Just make sure that we have our file or object selected. Pose 1, append. So that's going to bring in our mesh proxy. What we want to do with this, let's just get rid of the toolkit, toolbar, N. So this is positioned relative to how it was created. Now, depending on the couples pose, what we need to do with this proxy is position it relative to how we want the second pose to be positioned. So in this case, we can do a simple, let's do a simple rotation. So we're going to hold Control, snap to the grid, just rotate it 180, like so. So that's its position, and it's rotated, as mentioned, around the origin point that's important when we set up the proxy mesh. So what we need to do now, or all we need to do now, is create our second pose. Let's just save this incremental. Did we? No, we didn't. So save as to. All we need to do now, select, switch to pose mode. We just need to make the second pose relative to this mesh. So let's try lining up the shoulders. Like so. Whoops, that's a bit of a an unfortunate position of our default. But might be wholly appropriate under the depending on the circumstances. So let's just move that out of that position, because that was unexpected. Move that to, let's go with the waist. On the other hand, rotate. So what if they're both trying to get away from each other? Rotate. So that needs to be twisted that way, but we want the top to be twisted check the elbows. So that's a bit tight on that arm. And of course, the position of the avatar is based on the default avatars. So if you're doing this for a custom avatar, you might have to fiddle around with the position of the bones or the controls. Might have to fiddle around with these to get them to fit whatever special avatar you might be using. That's a bit tight. I don't like that. So and the head. Looky. That could be pose 2. Well, let's what about if that was on the arm or the elbow? Like that. We can switch to our local orientation so that we can then select individual bones or individual control nodes and do something with the hands or the fingers. Like so. So that's pose 2. And of course, because we had auto insert enabled, it's dropped in all the keyframes that we need. So before we save this, we need to rename this pose 2 _2. Whoops. So that's essentially our couples pose in terms of setting up the avatars, or how the avatars are set up relative to creating a couples pose. So if we save this, save incremental, toolkit, so sidebar, double check, make pose, export or bones, morph controls, we don't need that. Auto key, that's okay. So all we need to do now, where's the, oh, there's the export button. Scroll down to the bottom for the export button. So that again is pose number 2. That is posed using the active rig. So all these shapes relative to the static mesh that was created from pose 1. And that's then appended into the file so that we can create our pose, our couples pose. So file, save. Oops, wrong key. All we need to do now is export. And that's done its thing, so it's confirmed the export by prepping timeline. And all we need to do now is open this into Studio as well. So that's pose 1. So new project. Where is the, we're going to derive from PID again because it's quicker just to test the pose this way to make sure it works. So 10,945,930, enter. There is the empty mood. We've got it selected. There's the preview as per usual, and then derive. So there's the avatar based on our defaults. All we need to do is import the FBX. Import FBX. So we need to find this as pose 2. And there it is. Pose 2. Import. Well, not import, select, open. Go through the import process again. So this is what it's found in the file. There is our animation. Set up FBX. So this is okay. Don't need that. So uncheck. Next. No materials. Uncheck. There's our pose. Review. There it is. Import. So it's brought it in. And as before, we just need to switch to component. Action, new action, rename this stance dot standing action type avatar, new ensemble, asset. There is pose 2 XAF again because it's converted from our FBX. Loop duration 1, end 2, loops 0 for infinite. So again, we're just playing, or we're just looping a single frame of the sequence. That's all we need for static poses. And again, disable gaze, or so enable disable gaze. Apply. And then just scooch this off screen a little bit. There's the avatar we can still see, and preview, and this should there's our second pose. Now we'll probably do this in the next live stream, because we've got 2 poses, but what we need now is a furniture item that's set up to accommodate both avatars. So we've got pose 1, No, that's pose 2 and pose 1. So what we need to do in the next stream is create a furniture item based on this scene. So based on this, we can set up a furniture item that essentially uses the same origin point as the two avatars, as the seat node positions that will be necessary for the two poses to be dropped in or brought in to the same file. So in the next stream we'll probably do that. But that is creating a couples pose. So as mentioned, because we do not have a dedicated couples pose creator, we have to do it this way. So the summary is we create one pose. We create one pose, duplicate all the meshes that we need. Whoops again. We duplicate the meshes, detach that or disassociate it from the rig so that we're creating a completely independent object. We name that so that we know what we're looking for. So we renamed this pose 1, which then means that when we open our or create our second pose, we can append the mesh only, position that relative to the scene and what we want for our accompanying pose, our co-op pose, if you like. And then we export that one as well. So we have two exported FBXs that we then bring into Studio. So in this case, we've just brought them into separate empty mood files. That's what I was looking for. The empty mood files, just as a quick way to test whether they are working. So that's pose 2 and that's pose 1. But for them to actually work as a couples pose, we need a furniture item. And that's what we'll do in the next stream. So we'll call it quits there on this live stream. Thanks for lurking, lurkers. And we shall see you on the next live stream, which will be sometime soon. These are only supposed to be short live streams, but as with everything to do with IMVU and creating, it's not always, especially when it's being explained, it's not always a quick job to do something. Anyway, so Catsbits, spelt with a K, Katsbits, on all the socials, and catsbits.com, the website, if you want more information. And if you get in touch or join the Discord or something, I'm still trying to figure out how to do this or what to do about it. I'll make these files available so that you can download them and try them yourself and fiddle around with them in Studio. They'll work in Classic, but it's best just to stick with Studio for now. Anyway, see you on the next stream.